Shouldn't be too much longer now. I'm just double checking to make sure we're all set with the live stream for anyone who could not join us in the Zoom room. And it looks like we are all set. And so welcome. I wanted to get us officially started now. Thank you for joining us tonight. Just a few quick reminders, and then I'm going to turn things over. For anyone who still has not used this version of Zoom, just a reminder that we can't see you and we can't hear you tonight, so you'll need to use the chat if you'd like to connect with each other during the program. We are recording this evening's event, and as you heard me mention, we are also live streaming to YouTube. So tomorrow or the next day, if you want to watch again, you're going to get an after event email with a link to the video for this evening's talk. Please take a quick moment to look at the bottom of your screen. Again, this is a pretty common operation here as far as how we're going to do question and answers. But you hover at the bottom, you'll see Q&A. And if you have a question, we are asking you to please add any questions for Kim or Gilly or Christine at the bottom there in the Q&A function. If you decide you have a question, take a skim of other questions in there first. You'll see a little thumbs up under each question. And if you click that, that's called an upvote, and that'll let us know which questions are the most popular when we get to Q&A for today's program. And I think that covers it. I will turn things over now to our executive director, Lindsay Baker.
Thank you, Andrea. Welcome. I'm Lindsay Baker, Executive Director of Maryland Humanities. I'm thrilled that you could join us this evening for Why It Matters, Reckoning with Race, Equity, Allyship. This is the capstone event to our Voices and Votes electoral engagement project. This initiative explores civic participation as it relates to electoral engagement in a multivocal democracy, and is supported by a $50,000 grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, administered through the Federation of State Humanities Councils. The call to action by Kimberly Jones in the viral video this summer struck me, as it did many of you. I'm so thankful to have her voice, along with that of her co-author and our moderator, joining us today as we challenge ourselves to continue to push for a better future. We would like to thank our library partners who supported this evening's event through additional publicity in their communities. It's a long list. Allegheny County Library, Anne Arundel County Public Library, Baltimore County Public Library, Carroll County Public Library, Charles County Public Library, Enoch Pratt Free Library, Harford County Public Library, Prince George's County Memorial Library System, St. Mary's County Library, and Talbot County Free Library. Thank you to all of our library partners. Our moderator, Christine Platt, is a passionate advocate for social justice and policy reform. A believer in the power of storytelling as a tool for social change, Platt's literature centers on teaching race, equity, diversity, and inclusion to people of all ages. She currently serves as the managing director of the Antiracist Research and Policy Center at American University. Gilly Siegel grew up in Florida, came of age in Israel, where she served in the IDF, graduated from Hebrew University, and finally decided to call Georgia home. During the day, she's a lawyer for an advertising agency. At night, she writes. She's been writing in one form or another since she wrote her first young adult novel, which she typed out on an electronic typewriter. Kimberly Jones is a former bookseller and now hosts the Atlanta chapter of the popular Well-Read Black Girl Book Club, as well as the infamous viral sensation, the Young Adult Truth or Dare author panel at the Decanter Book Festival. She has worked in film and television with trailblazing figures such as Tyler Perry, Whitney Houston, and 8-Ball and MJG. Currently, in addition to writing YA novels, she is a director of feature films and cutting-edge diverse web series. She also regularly lectures on working and succeeding in the Atlanta film market. Thank you to everyone who's joining us tonight. And I want to invite my moderator, I see Christine, and Kimberly and Gilly to join us on screen. And I'm going to toss it over to you all for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much. And good evening, Kimberly and Gilly, and to all of our attendees. Definitely want to thank everyone for joining us tonight for this timely and important conversation around race, equity, and allyship. I want to begin our conversation with your best-selling work, I'm Not Dying With You Tonight, which was inspired by the events surrounding the death of Freddie Gray in Baltimore. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your collaboration on this project came to be? And we'll start with you, Kimberly.
Well, Gilly made me do it. That's right. Gilly saw this article in a newspaper about a group of kids that got trapped behind a police barricade during the civil unrest in Baltimore. And, you know, she's a mom, so it struck her, and she was like, she really wanted to like tell this story because we're writers and that's how we process information is by writing. But she had the good God-given sense to recognize that a story about civil unrest as it affects African-Americans, specifically as it affects African-American children, was not necessarily her story to tell. So enter Gilly.
And I think that's the perfect segue because I really want to know, like, how did you see yourself playing a role in this work? And more importantly, and specifically through the lenses of allyship?
That's a really great question. There's a teacher that I follow on Twitter and other various places. We all follow someone on Twitter. His name is Dwayne Reed, who said that racism is not a Black problem to be empathized with. It's a white problem to solve. And so I think for white people, it is necessary to participate in conversations about racism and actively dismantling systemic racism, systemic oppression. If we aren't participating in the conversation, how can we solve the problem that we created and perpetuate? And as Kim said, this is not a story I could ever, would ever tell by myself. I don't have the lived experience to do it justice. It would have felt wrong. It would have felt presumptuous. And frankly, I would have gotten it wrong. As a human being, I think my guiding principle is like a doctor's: first, do no harm. And putting an inaccurate representation of the Black community on the page would be harmful. And in the world of publishing, unfortunately, I think sometimes there's a perception that there's only room for so many of a particular type of story, and taking that place from a Black author would be wrong. And so I sought out Kim, hoping to have this experience with her. And she very graciously said yes, and I'm grateful for it, because otherwise I wouldn't have pursued the story, right? It's not my story to tell by myself, although I do think it's important for white people to participate in the conversation in order to dismantle racism.
Yeah, and I love Kimberly is smiling because you said, oh, I asked her to do it, and Kimberly is like, you gotta do it.
Did not gently ask me to do anything. She told me I was doing it.
True. I'm a lawyer by trade. That is my day job. So like I argue for a living, right? So she was at the time, although we were friendly, we were not close enough friends that we had each other's phone numbers. So I went to the bookstore where she was then the manager while I knew she was on shift, and I like lurked around the bookstore to the point that the staff was like, should we call somebody about this? Is this a problem? And Kim was like, no, it's fine. I know her. And I had my bullet points all set out, and I was like, I'm going to convince her to write this with me. And I started rattling off all my bullet points, and she let me get about 2 in, and she said, stop right there. And I, had this horrible sinking sensation because I thought, she doesn't want to write this. She doesn't want to write it with me. She's offended. This is a terrible idea. But actually what she said was, you had me at let's write together.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. And we've been on the journey together ever since.
Well, I'm a writer. I know how important, those connections are, and to have, your writing person is so powerful. That's a really sweet story, and I did not know that story. And really, of course, many attendees are probably, very familiar with the viral Passionate video. your speech about the Black experience in America, whether they caught it on YouTube or Trevor Noah, right? And I really love that you tied in Monopoly, which I recently learned was actually created as a way to show that capitalism is inherently unfair and only winnable if you hoard resources. So like, I did not know that. And the creator was actually shocked and actually troubled that people didn't get it.
And it was stolen from her. It was a woman who created Monopoly and it was stolen from her.
My mouth was literally on the floor, like just learning more about the truth behind this childhood game that we saw as innocent fun, which ended in people like flipping over the board, right? Because we're so angry because of the injustice, right? Which is literally, I feel, is happening in our country right now. But you know, before we talk about that a little bit, I really want to know just a little bit more about that moment in your speech. I know a little bit of the backstory, but you know, honestly, it made me cry because as a Black woman who works, you know, in the intersections of race and equity, I could literally feel your emotions coming through the screen, right? Like I could literally, I could feel it. Right. And if you could just tell me a little bit more about that moment in your speech and just what you were feeling and what you were thinking. And even if you intended for all of that to come out, because I know that happens too, right? You know, I was like, okay, I know I'm going to say, and then you get on camera and you're like, and you know what?
The latter is exactly what happened. Like I thought I had myself all under control and I had this controlled thought that I was going to express. And I just said, like, you know, it was probably one of those days when the dust from the Sahara was coming over with the ancestors and they just took over my body. It's funny because I had no intention on talking that day. I was actually interviewing people. I was doing some man on the street with David Jones, who was the documentarian that was putting that piece together. And I was interviewing on the people on the street and I started to get upset. Yeah. And he asked me why I was getting upset. And I said to him, I'm just frustrated because, you know, just several months prior to that, I tried to put together a neighborhood cleanup in my neighborhood. At the time, I was living in Bankhead, in a lower income section of Bankhead here in Atlanta. And I tried to put together a neighborhood cleanup and like 2 people showed up and we were only able to clean up like a block or 2. And I had reached out to all of these resources in the community to get like big dumpsters and all this stuff, thinking we're going to clean up at least a mile, right? We're going to clean up like an 8-block a day. And no one showed up. And so the 3 of us did the best that we could. And then, you know, fast forward a few months later, we're downtown. This is actually after the civil unrest happened in Atlanta and lots of property was destroyed. And there were lots of particularly well-meaning middle class to upper middle class African-American people downtown cleaning up. They had purchased their own cleaning supplies and things to get the graffiti off the wall. And they were downtown cleaning up. And the universal conversation that was happening while I was interviewing these people, when I was trying to figure out what pushed them to come downtown in a community that they don't even live in, because it's not really a residential area. This is like more of the commercial district of downtown, to clean up. And what I got, these are not the words that they said, but this is the way it was sizzling in my spirit, as Country Wayne would say. What I kept hearing was, the civil unrest that happened last night has affected me in a way that I am concerned about the white gaze.
Oh, wow.
And that's all I kept hearing in their explanation of why they were down there. And I was just like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about? People, you are focusing on what happened, and now everyone, and then it was like all of the commentators were talking about the property damage and all of that. And I'm like, the world is more upset about broken windows that are probably insured than dead bodies in the street, than Tamir Rice, who was a child playing with a toy gun, then George Floyd, who, let's just say whatever they say he did it. That officer was not judge, jury, and executioner. And I'm like, if you are concerned about the white gaze and this damaged property, I'm going to be honest, I blacked out.
Yeah. You're concerned about the wrong saying. And I think that's why that video was so powerful, right? And so even though you had all those emotions tied into it, and I saw the ancestor sis, they were there. They came. But I think, weaving in that piece about monopoly and getting, because sometimes that is what it takes, right? Is that one little, they're like, I just don't understand. I don't understand. And then you tie it into something and they're like, I get it, right? Yeah. And that's what happened with that video, is like, it was like this light switch went on for a lot of people because it was finally explained to them in a way that made sense, right?
Yeah.
And it's actually really hurtful for me to hear the why behind your ancestral, right? Because it's just painful. So it makes me understand even more why you said what you said, why there was so much anger, hurt, like you could feel all of those emotions in it. And all of those emotions were justified as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sure just from what I've read, commentary and things that I've heard, other people as well, right? And Gilly, I'm curious if you've had similar moments, right? Now, I don't know if ancestors come through like our ancestors do, but the rose-colored glasses coming off and feeling these emotions around the inequity, that have plagued this country for so long, it does sort of cause this rise, right? Because you start to realize, like, okay, I wasn't educated about this, right? No one told me about this. No, and when the rose-colored glasses come off, I don't understand how anyone cannot feel some sort of rise in emotion. So I'm similar. I'm curious to know if you had similar moments, and very curious to know about white ancestors. So.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think for me, my personal experience with it, I actually felt ashamed. And this was before, because Kim, and this has been Kim, and she's been talking about these topics for a long time, right? And so I have had the honor of her friendship and these discussions for a long time. But before I knew Kim, and it actually came, this was sort of a moment of recognition that I had through the arts, which is why I believe, and Kim and I both believe, art is a portal into difficult conversations, and it's necessary. I attended a play here in Atlanta by a local playwright named Janice Schaefer. It was called Brownie Points, and it was about a diverse Girl Scout troop that goes on like a Girl Scout weekend gone awry. Some of the conversations that they have are about race and justice, and it's a diverse cast. And I happened to be there on a night when they were doing a talk back with the cast afterwards. And a Black woman in the audience stood up and told about the talk, the first time that she had to talk to her son about police brutality. And I was recently a mother myself, and I sat there in the audience, I mean, really just tears streaming down my face, because it was the first time I consciously thought, my children, and I'm Jewish, so I think, I don't know about, I have Jewish ancestors that come through sometimes, but we are white presenting. I mean, I look white, and people will interact. My son is a blonde-haired, freckle-faced kid, and people interact with him as a white child. And it was the first time it really ever came to me that I am never going to have that conversation with my son. And I felt, and I was in my 30s when this happened, and I felt ashamed that my fellow human beings experience this, live with this, that my fellow Black mothers have this experience, and I didn't even know. And that's shameful. That's wrong, right? And to be 30 years old and to have allowed myself to be so insulated from the experiences of my fellow Americans. And that really sort of started me off on this journey of, that's not okay. And I don't want to stay that way. And what do I do? And where do I go from here? And I think if we're not having those feelings, we must.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say too, like, also extend yourself some grace. I know it's past that moment, right? But, so much of it is, again, it goes back to what we don't know and what hasn't been taught to us and what hasn't been shown to us. And, being insulated, right? And insulation doesn't just happen in white communities, it happens in Black communities as well, right? And so I always like to extend yourself some grace, right? Definitely want you to extend yourself some grace. But I mean, I feel like all of those emotions as well all of those feelings that emerge, that come up, they're so valid, because it is sort of like this awakening. And you're just cannot believe all of this is happening around me in this country that I call home, that I love, I consider to be one, it is just a very unsettling sort of feeling. And I love that you said art is a tool, right? I fully believe that fiction and literature just in general is it's one of the best teaching tools that we have, right? Especially you all write for young people, it is a way to engage them and get them to interact in these stories in a way that me sitting down with a history book and saying, okay, so in 1619, like you've already lost them, right? And they're like, 21, I'm not right. Get them to like interact with these characters, see themselves in these characters, which I think you all did such a wonderful job with your work. I think it's so important. And it goes back to really one of the things I want to talk to you about, Kimberly, is, I love how you talk about the importance of acknowledging the daily injustices that happen in America, right? And Gilly, that's what you were not aware of, right? And, as we know in our community, not all of them make the national news or even the local news, right? And I believe that knowledge of understanding and acknowledging those daily injustices is so important in the pursuit of racial equity and making it a reality, right? And so can you speak to us a bit more about that, just the importance that you feel about learning about the history of racial injustice in this country and daily injustices that happen in this country? And I know you teach that through your literature as well, but I think, attendees would love to hear your thoughts on that. I know I would.
Yeah, it's like funny. It's like, I can't wait. I'm so excited about me and Gilly's second book, Why We Fly, that's coming out this fall, because that one really tackles that thought point of like the daily indignities, the things that happen in school systems that we're unaware of. The broad stroke of that book is about how the world views strong women across the board. But one of the subsets of it is how Black children are punished at harsher rates in school than other children. Like they can commit the same infraction, but they receive harsher sentences, if you will. One kid might get, just get like after school suspension or something like that. Black kids are getting 10-day suspensions or getting expelled from school. Getting expelled from school, getting kicked out of entire school districts. Same infraction. And so that's one of the things that I say is interesting about what has happened with the BLM movement is that although I totally appreciate what the queens who created the Black Lives Matter hashtag were saying, I don't think we've even begun to tap into Black lives. We have created a movement that is us trying to receive justice for Black deaths. Because if you're talking about Black lives, you're talking about Black people being able to live and thrive and grow and being able to go through life without being so consciously aware of their Blackness. Even things like, you hear people talk about things like being followed around in stores and things like that, but it is been implanted in us in such a way that makes us so conscious of who we are. I can't recall being in a store and placing an item even in my hand that's not visible to everyone, to make it clear that I'm not trying to steal the item, even though I've never stole anything in my life. You know what I mean?
So exhausting. It's exhausting.
It's so exhausting.
I did not realize how exhausting it was until my first trip home to West Africa. And home, I know that is my original home, right? My ancestral home, which it was very, odd to go to home and I have no residence. I can't, reach out to my, family, right? But I remember, and I had already told everyone on the trip, I'm like, look, y'all, I love my naps. I have to nap. I got a nap. So I don't know all these plans. I'm looking at this itinerary, but I need a nap, right? And by day 3, I was literally up at 3 a.m. We're out in the streets dancing. I'm like, why do I have so much energy? Oh, because I get to just be a person, right? It was this feeling of not having to always be conscious of blackness, right? Of not always having, as you said, to be holding something, not, look, I got it, not stealing, right? And intuitively, we know I could be holding this in my hand and it doesn't even matter, right? So there is an exhaustion.
There is an exhaustion. And even though you're holding that in your hand that way, if you were walking around a store and you were trying to peruse the shelves and you had a purse, you wouldn't even slip it visibly into your purse and be sticking out so that you could touch the items, because you would know that that would instantly put a spotlight on you. No matter how beautiful and gorgeous and well put together you are, you wouldn't do that. I ran a test one time with a coworker when I managed the bookstore. The kids were coming in and I said, I just want to show you something. I want you, while we work this shift today, I want you to monitor something. I said, I want you to watch all the white children when they come into the store. And I want you to notice how they handle all the material and they open the books and they pull things off the shelves and they may even accidentally open something or whatever the case may be, but they feel free. And I said, I want you to watch all the Black children. Not one Black child is going to touch anything without getting an eye from someone on permission to touch it, because before they enter that store, since they could walk and talk, this is the talk that white America also is not aware of. Their mother has told them before they go in the store, don't touch anything, don't pick anything up. We're not getting anything. If we get something, I'll let you know. And people don't understand that that is residual from Jim Crow, where literally the through line could be a child is playing in the store, accidentally breaks something, the family can't pay for it, and it can escalate until your father being hung from a tree. That was the escalation cycle. So my grandmother would tell my mother, don't touch anything, don't pick anything up, don't touch anything in this store, to literally keep her, my mother, and my grandfather safe. And so it gets passed down in a way that now my mother thinks that that is store etiquette, but it's actually rooted in trauma and fear.
Yeah, and it lives with us. And it stays with us, right? And I love that you talked about like going in the store. Gilly, I'm also a mom. In my mind, still 6, but somehow she's getting ready to go to college. But I remember sort of that same thing, right? Like going in the store, and there's a moment where you watch other children, and I mean, you have white parents who are like, "This is an apple. Here, hold the apple." I'm not giving my child I mean, the idea of even giving them an apple and wondering what might happen, right? Because is this literally generational fear, trauma that has been passed down to us as survival, though, right? And so that's what makes it so complicated, is like, they didn't tell me these things to hurt my feelings or to cause this trauma or this, fear.
They told you to keep you safe.
Yeah.
And Gilly, I really want to know if you have anything to add to this, because, I do feel that in many Black communities, and I'm not going to say all, but in many Black communities and in our families, we have an understanding because we have to, because it's for our survival. And as you mentioned, we have to have that talk with our children, with our students, if we don't have children, right? Because I'm trying to help you survive. These rules are rooted in love, because I know something about this country that you don't know, right? And I called it letting the air out of my daughter's bubble slowly. Wow. I let it out slowly. There are some parents, they're like, you know what? You're 3, pop. We're gonna erase this country, right? And I was like, let the air out slowly, right? But like, either way, whether the talk is a slow talk or the talk is, we're going to start having it now, we have to have this talk. And so when we think about allyship, or, how can this educational awareness be approached by people who want to be allies and advance this work? Because they're not having this talk. They're in the store saying, hold the apple, run over I'm sorry, y'all, but I have seen white children really act up in the store.
Yeah,
I mean, point where other parents, I'm looking like, ooh, right? But there's no fear. That is what entitlement and freedom feels like, because you have no fear. You can break something. Either your parent will pay for it, or you'll say you're sorry and you go on with your life, right? And so very curious to hear your thoughts on this, Gilly.
I mean, what a weight that we ask that Black people carry that we don't. And the honest truth is we don't carry that weight. There isn't the generational trauma because the truth is we won't. As you said, we'll pay for it. We'll pay for the damage, or we'll get off with the slap on the wrist. And it's what a terrible weight that we expect people to carry so unjustly.
Yeah.
I think we have to, for me, I started home, right? I can preach to 3 people in this world, and all 3 of them came out of me. And so it's my obligation to talk to them about this. And to me, it also starts with your friendships, right? Especially as a white person. Particularly a lot of my sort of white liberal friends, when I say, look around you at your friend circle, and not the people that you work with, but when's the last time a person of color was in your home in something other than a service capacity? Because this learning and this awareness of the death by 1,000 cuts and the daily indignities, it comes from me being genuine friends with people who are different from me, with people who are with Black people, right? Hearing Kim's experiences, hearing Kim's son talk about his experiences, so that when, I live a walking distance from, sort of like a town square where the kids can play and hang out. And my daughter's going into 8th grade. When they were all in 7th grade, they wanted to walk there after school. And she has a group of friends that is of various different races, including Black friends. And having the open conversation with her of, now you understand that if you act up and you're jumping on the bench, nothing's happening to you, other than maybe them calling me to come get you. But you understand your friend Jordan might face police interaction, right? That someone's calling the cops on him. They're telling you to get on home. They're calling the cops on him. And if the cops come to him, you remember the story of Tamir Rice. So to me, it's I have to pop the bubble too, because my children share this world with Black children. They cannot perceive their experience to be differently than those.
Yeah, I love that. It makes me think, I think it was the poet Clint Smith. He was giving this impassioned, it was such a beautiful poem, but it was centered around how he wanted to play with the water gun. So all Black children have this, when that bubble popped, for real, right? I let the air out slowly for my daughter. If she were on this call and I was like, okay, when did the bubble really pop? She knows that moment. And for him, that moment was he wanted to play with water guns with his friends. The sun was going down and his parents were like, you can't. Why? Here's why, right? I love that you also said start at home. To me, so important for everyone who's listening. Start at home, because this is the question that we get all the time. Christine, I'm so frustrated and angry. What can I do? Where do I start? I don't have any followers. What do I? And I'm just like, no.
Better humans.
Yes, Kim and I talk about wingspan, right? Like your wingspan are the places and the people that you touch generally in the course of a month. It's my children. It's my place of work. It is my house of worship. So you don't have to have 1,000 million followers on the internet. You have access to 10 people a month that you could start talking to about these things in one of the places that you frequent. Yeah, that's all. Just start there.
Yeah, I say start at home. Then you can start in your neighborhood. Then you can go to your community, right? Then you get you gotta start where it's going to count and where it's going to matter, right? Because that's the other thing is, if you're doing all of this work outside and your kids are still not getting, or your family is still not getting, or your friends are, you're not really doing the work. But we could have a whole Zoom about doing the work, because I can't. Okay, so I also think this speaks to, getting people to understand not only the importance of presidential elections, right, but also congressional elections, which determines who represents each state in Congress, right, and deciding which political party will hold a majority of the Chamber of Congress for 2 years. And unlike the Electoral College, right, this is decided by popular vote. And in the past 2 years, I have certainly seen more engagement and interest in congressional, state, and local elections than I have in a very long time, right? So I think this also centers around this educational awareness. Are you all seeing the same in your communities? And we could start with you, Kimberly, since we just ended with you, Gilly. Are you seeing sort of the same thing, this increased sort of okay, I need to understand how this election thing works, right? Because I hear that, aside from the presidential elections, like, how is this working? How are these people getting in Congress, right? And I love when we get those questions, because that is a whole nother level of citizen engagement that is so powerful in bringing about this change and doing the work, right, that people talk about all the time. So curious to know, Kim, if you're seeing some of the same thing.
Yeah, I'm actually seeing a lot of it, and it is a direct response to the civil unrest of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
We're still and had to be aware of the world, and so we have this global unrest that happened, which is, I believe, going to be a marker in history for a very, 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 very long time. But what was born out of that was a crop of grassroots leadership like we've never seen before. I am the entertainment and culture chair for a task force here in Georgia called the People's Uprising. We have been on the grounds for 15 days straight, protesting a very horrific voter suppression bill here in Georgia, HB 531. We are joined by 20 other organizations. We've actually formed a coalition of different organizations that have now come together, but many of these organizations, like ours, I mean, and some of them are, old school staples like the NAACP and the Poor People's Movement and different ones like that. But many of them, like Promote Positivity Movement, are ones that were born out of the civil unrest of 2020. And so I think because grassroots organizing hit an all-time high in 2020, people are very aware of what's happening with their elections as it relates to not even just what's going to happen in the Capitol in DC, but what's happening in their capital in their state. Because there is a very coordinated act right now by the GOP to put forth bills that push forward Jim Crow level voter suppression. And it's happening in 43 states at the state legislator level. And I'm seeing movement and action from everywhere from Washington to Minnesota to Idaho, with people fighting against these horrific bills that the GOP are putting forward. And so what it also has done has made us all organize around the HR1 bill that's happening at the federal level that will then give us some federal precedents to fight these bills in court if they are getting passed at the state level. And so I think that people are aware. I think people became very clear, and I think people are beginning to understand civics in a way that school should but doesn't teach, which is you can hold people far more accountable at the local level than you ever can at the federal level. Gilly will tell you, I'm down at the state capitol almost every day to their chagrin. And, because I know the law, and I know that if I stand in the rotunda when they get out of session, that my legislator has to talk to me.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was laughing because you mentioned that both Gilly and I were like,
well, then they should listen to us, Christine, because no, but it's really profoundly true. Like, the thing that I want us to come out of 2020 with in terms of momentum is the desire to focus not just on the presidential level or the US Congress level, but the local level. I hope that we are all more understanding now of the extraordinary power that is wielded at your local level. School boards of election, who determines the districts, who determines your voting districts and is responsible for gerrymandering? That's not the president of the United States. That's your local elections board. Who is your sheriff, an elected official? Is your DA an elected official? Like, this is extraordinary power is wielded at these levels that has a real impact on people's lives. And I hope that we keep this enormous energy. I hope in particular that what we showed here in Georgia is that change is possible, right? If you had asked me 4 years ago if I ever thought Georgia would turn blue, I would have said not in my lifetime.
It was unbelievable. You have to know, it was unbelievable to watch. And I grew up in the South. I'm from South Florida. And I mean, there was a part of me that was so hopeful, but then there was this other part of me was like, Christine, bring it down. Remember the last time you were hopeful? Look at the space we're in. Like, I mean, yeah. And so there were so many people, not just in Georgia, but around the country we were literally watching with bated breath, like, is this really about to happen? Right. And it showed people the power of their vote. Right. And so for me, like getting people to understand, again, there was like, how do I do the work? I'm like, part of the work is citizen participation. Right.
Yes. Yes, we are a participatory democracy. Show up at the polls, and don't just show up every 4 years when we're electing a president. Show up every time there's a local election. Show up every time there's a special election, especially. Those fly under the radar like nobody's business.
I hope we showed people how to do it here in Georgia with old Ossoff and Warnock, though, because at the end of the day, what I teach people is these people are in your employ. And that's how you need to view them. You are their boss. You pay their salary. You don't work for them. They work for you. And your vote is your ability to hire and fire. It is your employee review. Are you doing a good job? Then you get to stay. Are you doing a bad job? Then you need to go. And we need to handle them that rough. We need to handle them that abrasively. They need to know that we're watching, that we're aware of what bills they are reporting. I stood outside in front of the Capitol yesterday and named every single member of the House that has visited Trump, because I was like, I want the world to know what you guys are all doing right now. And I'm going to continue to tell your business because you're my employee, honey. I stand in front of the Capitol and go, that's my house. I'm allowing you to sit in it. I can choose for you not to sit in it. And they need to be handled that rough because they have gotten way too out of hand and think that they are the people who manage the people. No, honey, you are there in a seat to do as I tell you to do, like my child. And if you decide that you don't want to do that, I will find someone who will listen.
Woo. Gilly.
This is right?
I mean, I totally understand why you were stalking her. I'm sorry, you didn't say stalking. You said follow.
Lurking. I was lurking. Right? I mean, you see why I love her. You see why I'm like, I'm so lucky just to get to be her friend.
I see why you're like, no, you have to write this book. But you spoke about the importance of education because this is not taught, right? And I remember, not trying to date myself here, but I remember watching I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill. And that's how I learned I was like, oh, that's how this works, right? But if it's not taught, right? If citizen participation and the importance of citizen participation is not taught, people don't know the power that they have as citizens, right? As Kimberly said, to be in this house.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in this house,
and
right?
So much. The sad part about that is kids have so much energy for change. When I say hope looks like the future, it's not to absolve myself of responsibility. Yeah. It is to indicate how beautiful I think the next generation is, but they don't know what they don't know. I'm working with a group of students right now. I won't tell you their idea because I don't want to steal it. They have this amazing idea that they're trying to make happen. They first came and they said, well, we're going to do this as a federal mandate. And I was like, well, do you know which of is that a federal law or is that a state law that you're working on? They don't know. And I don't blame them for that. I hold our education system accountable for that. Mm-hmm. But they have all this energy to change. And I'm like, we have got to get the information into their hands that they need to convert that energy into action.
I love that you talk about that because I can't even count how many racial equity trainings and anti-racism 101 workshops and all those things I've done. But I am a facilitator for the Anti-Defamation League's No Place for Hate, which is literally magical. You all have to do it. It will invigorate you in a way that, it's some of the most beautiful work that I've done. And what I noticed is that when and literally I'm adjusting the slides a little bit, right? Because young people are brilliant and I don't need to dumb anything down for them. And so we're having the same conversations and the pushback from children versus adults is mind-blowing. Young people are saying, okay, you've given me all this information. What do I need to do? What's next? What do I need to do? The adults are like, well, I have a question. Am I really racist if, and I'm like, not to say that I've given up hope in it, not to say that I don't enjoy working with some adults, but the energy and commitment to this, they don't see it as work. This is life for them, right? This is, what do I need to do to make sure that my Black friend does not die? What do I need to do to make sure my Asian classmate is not harassed? Tell me what to do. I don't have to go through all this legwork of explaining, seriously, there is racism in this country, right? Like 90% of the time with my workshops with adults is trying to get them to understand that what we're talking, this is reality, right? And I love what you said, Gilly. Young people are engaged and committed in a way to bring about change that this country has never seen, right? And so it is so important and so powerful to put this information in their hands, right? Understanding and knowing the history of racial inequity in this country is so important for young people. And that history is often the missing link for young people, right? Because they get what's happening now, but they're like, but I don't understand why we're here, right? And
Right.
so we can't start these conversations with the civil rights movement.
Okay.
We can't start conversations with Jim Crow, right? And, you know, I recently wrote a middle grade work on MLK, and it was the first time that a publisher did not give me a chapter outline to tell his life. And so I got to start MLK's story in the 1400s, right?
Wow.
Then we go to 1619. Then we talk about, right? Let's talk about, before we start with Martin Luther King was born in January, let's talk about why he had to dedicate his life to fighting for civil rights, right? And so I love that you both talk about that. And I'm really, and we have a number of questions that are coming in. And you touched on this briefly. So this is my last question before we get to audience Q&A, because I was totally about to ask about why we fly, right? I was like, I'm gonna have them on camera. They're gonna have to tell me more about that, right? And so, you have this new book coming out this fall. Congratulations to you both. All I knew was that I saw it was announced this week, and that it was an ode to athlete and activists and ambitious girls, and I knew that the cover was amazing, right? And I know, Kim, you shared a little bit earlier, but can you tell us a little bit more about that project, if it weaves in some of these themes that we've been talking about tonight?
Yeah, it definitely does. This is yet another project that Gilly made me do.
I love it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, she's the idea guy. She's the idea guy. And it's funny because she came up with this idea in the midst of us writing I'm Not Dying With You Tonight, because people don't realize we started writing I'm Not Dying With You Tonight in 2015. So this is a 5-year baby that this has been. I mean, it came out in 2019, but we started writing it in 2015. We didn't have an agent. We didn't know what was going to happen with it at that time. And so in the midst of that, Gilly came up with this idea to do this story. And this was at the height of, people taking a knee being part of the national conversation. And I was at a protest. I was protesting. A dear friend of mine had put together an anti-police violence weekend. And at that protest, I got to march with the Kennesaw cheerleaders who had just been punished for taking a knee during the game. And so when I met these brilliant, bright young women who were full of ideas and able to put them in like these lyrical ways in which they spoke so eloquently, and just it really took me back to have this like reckoning that I had this ideology that I really needed to speak up and be the voice for marginalized girls who grew up like I did, because I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And so, Gilly, I have this phrase that I say that, I just wanted people to know that hood girls could be heroes too, And so, oh, I'm so sorry about that. My computer also has this, iPhone attached. Turn it off. Okay, sorry about that. But I had this ideology that I needed to be the voice for marginalized girls like myself, that I needed hood girls to see themselves on the page as a hero and not as a caricature of themselves. And so I wanted to dedicate my time to that. But when I met these girls, when I met these Kennesaw cheerleaders, it said to me, oh man, it woke something up in me, is that, you know, most people talk about growing up code switching, and I did grow up code switching. However, it was not between the Black and white world as people would think about it. It actually was the fact that I grew up having to code switch between my marginalized community that I lived in and the bourgeois cotillion Black world that my mother was putting me in. And so I was like, oh man, this will give me an opportunity to tell the other side of the coin that I grew up in. Kids who are, you know, children of the Divine Nine, kids who have, you know, kids who are cotillions, kids who it takes them a second to recognize that they are marginalized. And I realized, you know, it's funny, you were talking about telling that story of the first time that you remember that being different. And I remember that being that my neighbor across the street from me, Ellen, who was my dear friend, little blonde girl that I used to play with. There was one day when my mom asked her mom, who was very kind to me, if I could stay at their house late. She would be home for work late, if I could be with them. And her mom said, fine. But I remember when it was time for them to have dinner, that they made me sit on the living room floor, and they sat and had dinner at their dinner table because their father didn't want me eating at their dinner table with them.
Oh,
yeah. And this is not when I lived on the south side of Chicago. This is when I'm living in a suburb of Chicago in Kankakee. And my mom has a good job, and we have a house, and we're in this multi-culti, you know, neighborhood. But I remember that. I remember feeling, not knowing what was happening to me, because I think I was about 7, but knowing that I was made to feel bad. And I remember sitting there and feeling bad. And I remember them giving me like a snack, like goldfish or something, while they had dinner at the table. And so I thought, when you grow up, kind of like you grow up in the hood, you grow up in the projects, you grow up in these spaces, it's that thing where it's the bubble pop. You have to just be told. But because that part of my formative years was happening in the suburbs, my mother was letting it out loose.
Oh yeah.
And so I was like, let me examine and explore a girl who's having to have it let out as a teenager, having yet not had that experience of being made fully aware. I forgot what the question now. I've gone rambling.
Okay.
I mean, meanwhile, where is this man today? I would like to have a word with this man.
Gilly and I have, we just want to visit.
Things I'd like to say.
Even I forgot the question because this was so good. And, you know, 2 things. First of all, I too, code switching, right? It's all, there's some generational sort of survival skills that are passed down.
Yeah.
And code switching was a survival skill for me. Yeah. I had to learn how to code switch, right? Yeah. But there was something you said about getting young people, especially young people who may not sort of fit, they're not in the ghetto, they're not in these spaces, right? Getting them to understand that they're marginalized. And I think those of us, those parents who we let that air out slowly, we also have moments where we're like, I am doing my child a huge disservice, right? Yeah. For me, it was my daughter and I were in the car. We're here in DC. We were driving down Pennsylvania Avenue, not that Pennsylvania Avenue, east of the river, right? And we have a question about what is code switching. I will answer that in a second. But we were driving down Pennsylvania Avenue, and she's sitting in the back seat, her little self. She's 5 or 6 years old, and we passed by this laundromat, and she says, "Oh, coin laundry. They can wash my coins. Let's go." And I was just like, I have failed I was like, I am doing her such a disservice by letting the air. I'm like, clearly,
those nasty coins are finally going to get cleaned.
Right. But it's so true, because there's a level of privilege that also exists in our community that we know can be stripped away. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. The young people in our community don't know. She's looking out a coin laundry. Right. But like, I know that even though I can provide for you and you can go to private school and you can have all these other lavish privileges, you are still a little Black girl. And no one is going to walk up to you and see you as, that's a little Black girl who doesn't know what a coin laundry is and who goes to private school. You're a little Black girl. Yeah. Right. And so I feel like that there are moments too for us adults. I feel like that was therapy, sharing that with y'all. I had to get that out. But code switching is, and I should also add, it's not just something that is done in the Black community. It's something that is done in marginalized communities. And it is essentially, there's a way that you speak at home with your family and friends. And then there's a way that you are supposed to speak when you are in white people's establishments, right? Mm-hmm. And that code switching is supposed to protect you, right? To allow people to see you as human and not one of those people. Clearly, you are educated. You can speak the King's English, right? And so, and it's this false sense, obviously, of security, right? But again, it's something we have to examine, those survival skills that were passed down from that Jim Crow era, because they are not applicable in the world that we live in now. And so I love seeing young Black people do the thing, right? And not being afraid to speak how they speak, right? I love seeing, people and, like, I'm going to speak my native tongue, right? Mm-hmm. Because I'm around you and you're uncomfortable because I'm speaking Spanish, right? Like, that's what code switching is, Jamie. So I hope that answers your question. Gilly, is there anything that you want to add to our conversation? Any coin laundry stories?
I think that this notion of like who we are in our own community versus how the world sees us, when you're a member of a marginalized community, you are constantly aware that your entire community is going to be judged based on you and your actions. So when right? Like I know that as a Jewish person, whatever I do, people are going to say Jewish people do that, right? And so you talked about code switching, like, I don't want to be the shtetl Jew, I don't want to be the this type, the financial, the Bernie Madoff, which someone called my son at hockey practice one day. Like we know and understand, like I think part of why it's important, and the character in the book in Why We Fly is Jewish, and she is learning to be a better ally, is recognizing the places where marginalization can create empathy without comparing, right? Without trying to say this is better or this is worse, right? Because there are certainly experiences that
the oppression Olympics.
Yeah, I don't play the oppression Olympics. No, we're not going for gold in that. But it can build empathy, right? I recognize something in your experience that is analogous to my own. And hopefully what the character in the book is doing, as we all are, including myself, is, especially in 2021, learning the difference between ally and accomplice. And to me, an ally is someone who's like, right on, I support your cause. Whereas an accomplice is someone who is willing to risk something personal to create change. And too many of us are allies, or want to be, and we're not moving in the direction of putting something personal on the line, or recognizing, right? So does the white character in the book, I'm going to get her name wrong. We're bad with our own characters' names. Lenny.
Lenny, that's it.
Lenny. Does Lenny see when Nellie is receiving disproportionate punishment, and does she understand why it is? So that's one of the things that I hope people will examine in the second book.
Yeah, because people need to recognize that the way, like I always say, the way Black people speak is cultural, not remedial. And
yeah.
Need to stop trying to make that.
Ebonics was what I was not supposed to, right? Yeah. I was not speak because that was Black vernacular, right?
Well, it's also in the white community to stop using that as a judgment, right? Like it's used as a tool of oppression. And Kim has taught me this, right? we look down on it and we judge it until it becomes cool, and then it enters the vernacular, and you've got like politicians saying the word lit, or we started at the beginning of this conversation talking about whether or not a Black child feels comfortable picking up something in the store. The phrase receipts, we use that now freely, like just to mean I know the truth, but I'm assuming that comes out of the need for a Black person to have a receipt when they walk out of the store. And we look down on that until it becomes cool, and as Kim says, then we monetize it, and now it's good.
Yeah. And it's like there's so, and one of the things that we also, I'm glad has entered the conversation, which I don't know if there is a term like, as code switching is relative to language, but as it is an appearance, I hope Gilly doesn't mind me sharing this story, but she told me a story once about being Jewish and how she associated straightening her hair with being presentable. That if she was having some big event, she was groomed to believe if she's having some big event or some big presentation or somewhere where she has to, show herself as presentable, that her beautiful mane, it was seen as not presentable, and that she needed to get a blowout or straighten her hair in terms of presentation. And it's just like, for all marginalized communities, that is part of the white supremacist delusion that we have to break down, is that whiteness is the standard, that it is the standard, and that everything else needs to be othered.
Yeah, I agree 100%. One thing that you said, Gilly, was that I mean, you said a lot of wonderful things, but this last, there was a statement that you said about allyship versus accomplice. And I love that. And I also want to speak to allyship just really quickly, because you have a lot of self-appointed allies out here, right? And I want people to understand what allyship truly means, right? So before they can even move to being an accomplice, getting people to fully understand what allyship is there a way that you can just explain that in plain terms to people, and getting people to understand that you don't get to self-appoint yourself as an ally. It is the community who sees you and welcomes you and trusts you as an ally, right? And so can you speak to that a little bit? And then I promise everyone I will jump to the audience Q&A. I promise.
Oh, that's a good one and a hard one. I don't know that I've ever had to define it. I mean, I would say it is being a supporter of a particular community that seeks justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion for that community in the way that the community wants to be supported. So like what you said is crucial. It's the key. I think sometimes we want, and I really dislike when white people use the word woke about themselves, but it's like we want to put on that badge of wokeness and like, I'm woke now. That's not supportive, right? That's oftentimes what that leads to is you speaking over the community, you taking actions that the community doesn't want you to. And so what you need to do is step back and listen and learn, amplify the voices from the community they're speaking, take the actions that they ask you to take, recognize that you're going to get it wrong. Sometimes we're all human, we all make mistakes, acknowledge it, and do better next time.
And those learning experiences, right? I mean, I think, oftentimes there's such this stigma about being called in and called out, right? And understanding that like, this is emotional labor for me. And I'm calling you in or calling you out. This is a gift that I'm giving, saying like, this is an opportunity for you to learn from your mistake and to do something different next time, right?
Well, to me, it's also wild that we're more worried about getting called racist than being racist. Like that is wild to me. If I said, or am racist, I don't want to be. So I would much rather if I said or did a thing and I didn't know it and now I know it, like, I don't care what you call me. It's more important to me that I'm not doing the thing anymore.
Right. I could talk to you both all night. Okay. But the audience is like, ma'am, questions. Okay. One of the first questions I'm going to ask is when you were writing I'm Not Dying With You Tonight, what, if any, of your own real life experiences did you implement into the work?
Ooh.
Ooh.
Well, these girls take a very ill-advised walk through an fake Atlanta. It's sort of an invented neighborhood, but it's based on a real neighborhood in Atlanta at night by themselves. And so both of us have taken some ill-advised nighttime journeys that we should not have taken. And they both, like, the other really important thing about that is they team up to get home safely because they're girls. And we always ask our readers to challenge themselves to answer, if they were male or male presenting, would they have needed to team up that night? And so both of us have also felt the need to team up with another woman for safety. So that's an experience.
Yeah, I think initially when we first started writing it, part of our research is we are two people who, although we write contemporary, we research and plot like fantasy writers. We are like, we need all the things. We need a full Bible this thick of the things before we start writing. And so we spent a lot of time with people who had lived through civil unrest. We talked to people, Gilly's aunt was around for the civil unrest in the 60s in Philadelphia. I talked to activists from Ferguson. I talked to a friend of mine who was a teenager and had to try to navigate his way home, similar to these girls during the LA riots. And so initially, more of it was just like getting these stories in and hearing these stories. One of the other things that we did was Gilly spent time with the SWAT team to see how a riot bubbles to that level and why they make the decisions they make on why they move in. And it was through that conversation with SWAT that we realized we had a big chunk of the book like way wrong. SWAT was like, none of this is making none of this goes together at all. And the character Marcus, who is the fan favorite, was birthed from us fixing the mistakes that SWAT was like, y'all sure y'all grown women, y'all didn't know this to work. And so, it's a lot of it is more rooted in the stories of the people that we did research with. But funny thing, I tell Gilly now, I like laugh. I'm like, are we psychic? Do we have psychic ability? Because we would write sections of the book and then they would happen. Like there's an entire scene in the book that resembles an incident that happened in Charlottesville, and we wrote it, and then Charlottesville happened, and we had to determine if we were going to keep it, if it was honoring what happened or if it was doing a disservice to what happened. And in that section, we did decide to keep it, but we also, we had a section in the book where the girls had a very direct interaction with the police that was in the original drafts. And in the midst of us writing this book, I myself was a victim of police brutality. And so I was living with, unbeknownst to me, maybe everybody else around me was noticing it, I was struggling with it, and I was struggling with some PTSD responses to it. And we were sitting at Gilly's table, and we were getting ready to edit that section, and I had a panic attack.
Oh, wow.
And so instead of trying to force my way through it, we just cut it. We just gutted that entire scene, because at that moment I couldn't manage to I couldn't manage to write it.
Wow, that was heavy. All right, next question. So we have hi, thanks for this event. Thank you for joining us. This attendee read your interview with Roger Sutton about this great book, and they wonder if you have recommendations for additional books to explore and learn more about this crucial topic. And they feel that they have so much to learn, from corrected history to real view of others' lives and thinking. So do you have any recommendations?
That is just music to my ears. I hope we have... Actually, I hope you have a solid hour. I'm best in the category of young adult. I read the most young adult work. So a lot of this is going to be young adult. I would say if you're looking for nonfiction, Stamped, which is the young adult version of Ibram Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning. It's co-authored with Jason Reynolds. Anything by Jason Reynolds. If you particularly want...
Yes, Stamped the Remix. Stamped the Remix. And I also highly recommend that book and the audiobook. And I recommend adults as well. All right. So we got...
Jason has a co-authored book with a white man named Brendan Kiley, which is not unlike I'm Not Dying With You Tonight. There's some crucial differences, but that's really wonderful.
All American Boys.
All American Boys, that's exactly right. Some more recent ones. This Is My America is really wonderful. The Black Kids is really wonderful. Anything by Nick Stone, Dear Martin and Dear Justice is a beautiful set of companion novels. And Dear Justice enters into questions about inequality and injustice in in our justice system. And I would also say, like, there, you know, and again, a thing that I am honored to know because of Kim, like, the Black experience is not a monolith. So I would say there are lots of different experiences, right? So look at authors like Elizabeth Acevedo for.
That's what I was gonna say. I love her. Evie.
The boy, right? These are Afro-Latinx experiences.
Oh, beautiful.
Are phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I also encourage, especially people who are just entering this space and really want to learn, actually YA and works that are written for young adults is like, it's perfect. It is really perfect.
Here's another thing that I would say, and I really, really strongly recommend this. Read about Black joy. Also read stories of Black romance. Also read stories about you know, the Black community in all of its glory, not just the trauma associated. So those are important. And I like, and certainly that's the story that we wanted to tell. But also read a Black rom-com or an Afro-Latinx rom-com. And so that your exposure is across the spectrum of experience.
And I feel the same way about the books that you select for young people, the children in your lives, right? Is making sure that these stories, you can teach history, you can teach, all these things can be taught from a place of joy. And so making sure that you are not teaching from places of pain and trauma with the literature that you're selecting. Yes, that is part of the experience, but it is one part of a very large and varied lived experience, right? The next question that we have is, there's a white, oh, sorry. She's like, I said, there is a white woman here, who is about to be a mother-in-law to an amazing Black woman. Congratulations. I love her so much, but realize that I've never lived her experience of racism and am still coming to grips with the white privilege that I've lived. What are some suggestions you have for me to connect more deeply with her and support her?
That's a wonderful question. First of all, I'm glad you're asking the question, right? Like, good start. I'm a book person, so I would say start with books. There is a wonderful book. Oh gosh, I'm going to blank on her last name. It's called Me and White Supremacy, and her first name is Layla, and she's delightful. And I met
Layla Siad. I love her.
So Me and White Supremacy, and do the notebook that comes with it, because it will ask you to grapple really, really hard and really deeply with privilege. And I would say,
sorry to interrupt. She also has a really great podcast that you all can listen to, the Good Ancestors podcast, right? Yep. I mean, I think it boils down to communication, right? I mean,
right. Talk to your future daughter-in-law if you guys, if and when you're comfortable. First of all, ask, like, enter into that conversation gently. Kim and I always describe what we have as a brave space, right? Because a safe space is a place where you're like, I'm only going to hear things that are comfortable for me to hear. We have a place where we have really uncomfortable conversations. We have a code word that we use to introduce the uncomfortable conversations, and we will not tell you what it is, because now
I was going to say, okay, don't tell us, but can you give us a sample code word that, like, or I guess explain how it works, right? So you're about to enter into an uncomfortable conversation. Yeah. How does the word work? Because I love.
So it would be like, for us, it originated when we were working on scenes in the book, and we would need to know something to get a character's reaction right, or to get language right. And so it would be like, this is not our code. It would be like mushroom. You know, we started out more gently than that. I'd be like, I need to ask you something that I'm uncomfortable with. Then it would be like, mushroom, would we say this in this situation? Or mushroom, a Black grandfather would never do that. What are you talking about?
I love that. That is so brilliant. And I have to say, I'm totally going to use that in the place for trainings, because I do think it is so important to have let people know this might be triggering, this is uncomfortable, this is right. And like, here's the safe word. And I know your word is not mushroom, but I also think it's actually super cool to have something that does sort of evoke, like you don't want the code word is gun, right? Like,
yeah,
no, it's our code word is even sillier than mushroom.
I love it.
But it's like, it's an intro, right? It's shorthand for us saying, I'm about to ask something that's uncomfortable and I know it. You know that I'm coming at this from a place of love. First of all, especially if you're the white person, make sure that you are coming from a place of love and willingness to listen. So I'm coming at this from a place I would never harm you. And I know that impact matters more than intent, but for the purposes of this, we need to talk about that. It's just,
I love that. I love that. And I'm totally stealing it. I'm telling you now, I don't care if this is recorded, I'm stealing it. Kimberly, I want the opportunity to answer and respond to that last question, which was, this is a white woman who is about to be a mother-in-law to an amazing Black woman. She loves her so much, but realizes that she's never lived her experiences of racism and is still coming to grips with the white privilege that she's lived. And she asked us for some suggestions to connect more deeply with her and support her. And so this is how we ended up with the code word.
Yeah, I think the first thing is like, to me, like the most revolutionary thing you can do is self-improvement. And so the first place before step one is not the interaction with the daughter-in-law. Step one is self-grappling. That's step one. And so one of the things that, you can do with that, the brilliant Layla Assad has an amazing book that comes with a workbook that you can purchase called White Supremacy and Me.
We already covered that.
Oh, but I'm like, that's it. That's the thing. Like, she needs to get that and like begin to do some work. And then also like, look around her friend group and see who she can also have these conversations with and, engage with people of a diverse group from a larger perspective, but also like, and this is what I teach people to do too, is to dig into her own personal history. To realize how her privilege has set her up for where she is in life. And so that way she can have a realistic view on what she's received and then that way she can react based upon her own personal privileged experience. A lot of people don't know between 1925 and 1964, the US government underwrote $200 billion in home lending for people to buy houses because they understood that the quickest way to gain generational wealth for people in the nation was home ownership. 98% of that went to white people, 2% of that went to everybody else, Black, Latinx, everybody. And then they created the suburbs for these people to utilize that lending. And there was literally verbiage in those mortgages that said you could not resell those homes to African Americans, Jewish people, and Asian Americans. But sometimes it would just exclusively say African Americans. And so if you begin to dig in your research, I'm using this as an example to say, if you begin to dig into your research and you recognize that your great grandfather got the GI Bill when he came home from World War II, which they came up with ways in order to keep Black vets from receiving these things, then that allows you to say, oh man, I need to unpack how I was able to have a home and live where I wanted to live and receive this government assistance essentially. And it's like, so now how do I have conversations with community of color about home ownership?
Yeah.
About living, about redlining.
Yeah. If you live in an older home, you can also look
at your deed history.
Look at your deed and still be a racial covenant.
Yeah.
That is, because it wasn't that long ago, right? And I think that's also some of these wake-up calls for people when they're like, it sounds so long ago. It's like, no, deed on my home has a racial covenant, right? It was not that long ago. I know that we only have 2 minutes left. I can't even believe it. This has been so wonderful to be in conversation with you both. I cannot wait to read your new book. Can you give us a pub date? Like, when can we expect to have Why We Fly in our hands?
October 5th, maybe?
October
something.
All right. Well, we will definitely be on the lookout. This was so wonderful. thank you both. I know, Lindsay, did you want to come on and say a few final words? Thank you to all the attendees and these wonderful questions. This was amazing. I had a wonderful conversation with you both. Again, thank you.
This was fabulous. And Marilyn, thank you for having us. We love talking in Maryland.
Yes, this is the birthplace of our ideas, so we always love when we can do anything in Maryland.
Love it.
Thank you so much. I'm just coming to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who made this event possible. And the discussion was amazing. Above and beyond, I think, anything we could have hoped for. So thank you so much. Thank you to our promotional partners, Christine, Kimberly, and Gilly. We really appreciate it. And we want to remind everyone to pick up a copy of I'm Not Dying With You Tonight at your local bookstore or library. And October 5th-ish, October-ish, pick up the copy of the new book. So thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.